Hi, all. Welcome. Thanks to everybody for joining us from around the world for our final session of the Socialism 2020 virtual conference, From Rebellion to Revolution. I'm Dana Blanchard. I work at Haymarket Books, and I'm also part of the Socialism Organizing Committee. Before I introduce our tremendous speakers, I want to thank the organizers of the Socialism Conference, Democratic Socialists of America, Haymarket Books, and Jacobin. Also, a very special thank you to Verso, which has been incredibly supportive of the conference this year, and it was streaming one of the sessions on their YouTube channel for us. You can find out more about all these organizations by clicking on the links posted in the live chat. This is a critical moment for supporting independent politics, so we encourage you all to support Haymarket, subscribe to Jacobin, and join DSA as part of supporting this conference. And if you are in a position to do so, feel free to make a donation to support the Socialism Conference. No donation is too small, and there'll be some information posted on the screen and in the YouTube chat about how to donate. I also want to thank all of you for being part of our virtual conference this year and help holding the space for the Socialism Conference, even though we can't be together in person. It feels really important for us to have this political conversation and to talk about movement organizing and socialist politics now more than ever. So thank you for being part of it. We hope to see you all in person next year at the Socialism Conference, July 4th weekend in Chicago. A few housekeeping things before we get started. This video will be recorded and available for viewing afterwards on the Socialism Conference website. We'll also send an email to everyone who registered with the links to the recordings as well. We are moderating the live chat, but we can't guarantee that everyone will observe our community guidelines. If you want to hide the chat, there's a button at the bottom. And we also recommend you use the top chat feature if you want to have a more filtered chat experience. People who violate the chat guidelines will have their comments deleted as quickly as we are able. And with so many people joining this webinar, we may need your patience if we have any technical issues. If your stream gets choppy, you might help that by reducing your image quality. We'll give some instructions on how to do this in the chat as well. If our YouTube feed is interrupted for any reason, you may need to navigate back to the Socialism Conference website or to the Haymarket YouTube page to resume. The feed should resume there in case of any interruptions. And a special thanks to Mirabai, who's live captioning this event for us. Click on the CC button on the video to enable your captions. And people will post in the chat how to get the raw captions feed if there are any issues. So now to begin our program. The racist police murders of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Elijah McClain, and too many more have catalyzed a massive nationwide rebellion like nothing experienced in many of our lifetimes. The rebellions of this summer have achieved both immediate wins and faced harsh repression. Harsh repression, sorry. We know these upsurges are not going away, though, because the causes of oppression and the roots of racism in this country are very deep. Our panel today will discuss how we build on the mass anger and mobilizations of the present rebellion to carry out a full-scale revolutionary transformation of our society. And so now, without further ado, I want to introduce our three speakers and then hand it over to them. Our first speaker will be Amelia Blair-Smith. Amelia is the co-chair of YDSA and a rising senior at Carleton College. She lives in rural Minnesota and has experience with campus organizing through her YDSA chapter and with community organizing through Cooperation Northfield, a group of young leftists that engage in political education, cooperatively owned businesses, and environmental direct action. She is pursuing a degree in Africana Studies and is researching the successes and pitfalls of multiracial leftist student organizing. Amelia hopes to become a rank-and-file teacher. After that, we will have Jesse Hagopian. Jesse teaches ethnic studies and is the co-advisor to the Black Student Union at Garfield High School in Seattle, the site of the historic boycott of the MAP test in 2013. Jesse is an editor for the social justice periodical Rethinking Schools, and he is the co-editor of the book Teaching for Black Lives. He is also the editor of the book More Than a Score, the new uprising against high-stakes testing. Jesse serves as the director of the Black Education Matters Student Activist Award and is an organizer with the Black Lives Matter at School movement, and is a founding member of Social Equity Educators in Seattle. And finally, we will have Caree Peterson-Smith. Caree is a socialist and researcher fighting for revolution in our lifetime. He is especially interested in Black internationalism, demilitarization, and decolonization. In 2015, he was one of the authors of the Black for Palestine Statement. The way this is going to work is the panelists will each give some opening remarks, and then we will have time for a group discussion amongst the speakers. So take it away, Amelia.
Talk about what my experience was like at the Minneapolis protests to start off with, and give some political analysis of the situation on the ground, how it developed, and what demands have sort of come out of that. So the first night I was involved was Wednesday, which was the 27th of May, when there was a large crowd gathered at the 3rd Police Precinct in Southeast Minneapolis. And that was known for the organic Black working class energy that sort of burned the AutoZone that was across from the precinct. We weren't able to get to the precinct because there were lots of threats of retaliation, and the crowd dispersed a little bit before midnight. And then Thursday, the 28th, this was a time when I was pretty active at the 3rd Precinct with some of my comrades, and we waited there for a couple of hours protesting and standing outside of the precinct. The police ended up abandoning the precinct, and people were actually able to go inside to the precinct and take the guns, the materials, anything that was sort of left behind. And then the precinct was burned down. And there was just a lot of support in the crowd that I was seeing from, the Black working class people who lived in the neighborhood, and also people who seemed like they weren't from the neighborhood. I remember earlier in the night, some woman sitting next to me was complaining that they weren't burning down the precinct fast enough. So that was very inspiring and moving to sort of see. And then Friday, the 29th of May, by then, are mostly focusing their energy on two things. One is assisting at the newly established sanctuaries, one of which was in a fancy Sheraton hotel for a while, which is very amazing to see a sort of luxury facility being converted into free shelter for working class houseless people. And it's now been moved to a park. And the second thing people are focusing on is assisting in nightly defense of George Floyd Square, which is an autonomous zone set up in Southeast Minneapolis. And then next point I really wanted to hit was about where I see DSA and YDSA building on this movement, and what sort of the role of DSA and more especially YDSA is in the protests that have come out of the uprising in Minneapolis. So with Bernie Sanders dropping out and campuses suddenly closing because of the pandemic, many YDSA chapters were at sort of a loss of what to do next. The wave of protests have definitely helped chapters to mobilize their membership in a way that they needed to do. YDSA leaders are trying to turn the organic militant energy of students, of young people, of people of color into campaigns to cut ties between schools and police departments, with campaigns to defund campus police and campaigns to defund local police in order to reinvest in students and workers. As young socialists, we understand the importance of embracing the movement to defund the police because it is fundamentally a redistributive demand. YDSA leadership is working on this by running virtual workshops to teach students how to cut an issue and how to power map their campuses. We also have an amazing outreach team that reaches out to chapter leaders one-on-one to help them start campaigns. I've been a YDSA leader for a couple of years now, and I found that summers are largely kind of more of an inactive time for YDSA because of the constraints of the academic calendar. But this year, it's been absolutely exciting to me to see the leadership of YDSA leaders across the country during this summer to start redistributive radical socialist campaigns without necessarily needing to organize in person. Then I want to sort of hit on the point of rebellion to revolution, which is the title of the talk, and about how I feel it's very important for young people to engage in the moment for direct action. For example, being arrested or being shot at a protest can be like a crucial experience in a young person's political radicalization. But unfortunately, in many places of the country, that moment of rebellion has passed. So now what we must do is encourage young people across the country to turn their focus to redistributive campaigns, like campaigns to defund the police. In order for a revolution, we need to have an experienced body of competent young organizers who know how to organize and win campaigns that shift power to the working class. I truly believe that campus organizing should be a training ground for worker organizing. And I hope that all members take the skills that they learn in YDSA and then apply them to their workplaces. For example, through the rank and file strategy, YDSA encourages young people to get jobs in industries that are essential to American capitalism, like healthcare, education, and logistics. In addition, from the most powerful Ivy League universities to public high schools, there are many key points of intervention for YDSA into the American capitalist machine. So for most people, school is just one stage of your life, but I hope that the organizing lessons that young people learn in YDSA stick with them for a lifetime. Thank you.
Right on. Thank you so much, Amelia. That was fire. And as you literally described the fires burning, you had my heart soaring. So thank you for sharing your story with us today. And thanks to Haymarket for inviting me to be on this panel. It's been a difficult year of remote teaching with the COVID-19 crisis. And this uprising for Black Lives right now has just been so healing for me personally. Getting emails from my students saying they hope to see me at the next protest, and the energy they had for their final project, which was all about analyzing the uprising, was a great way to finish off the school year. And even though I think schools were shut down over the last few months, it made my heart sing to see my students, I think, in the greatest classroom of all, in the streets, right? Confronting police, demanding an end to hundreds of years of institutional racism. And, the youth are becoming, I think, the great teachers in our society today, right? And they are perhaps creating the greatest lesson plan ever written, right, for rebellion and hopefully on to revolution. And, I think my students are clearly not alone. Youth all over the country, as you heard from Amelia, are rising up in what the New York Times just called the largest movement in history, with over 550 different places in every single state in the United States protesting all at the same time on June 6th. And I'm just so grateful to the abolitionists like Ruth Gilmore and Angela Davis and Miriam Kaba, who laid so much of the groundwork for this uprising, and helped ensure that when young people did take the streets, when working people did take the streets, when BIPOC people have taken the streets, they took up the necessary and radical demands of defunding, disarming, and abolishing the police. And I'm grateful for all of the Black Lives Matter activists out there that did this work in the hard years, right? When these ideas were marginalized and ridiculed, I'm grateful for all the educators and parents and students in the Black Lives Matter at School movement who are my comrades, who put forward radical demands, which were radical at the time, for removing police from the schools. And now we're claiming victories around those demands in city after city. I want to tell you about Seattle. Here in Seattle, we kicked the cops out of the schools, right? Students organized a petition. Within a couple days, 18,000 people had signed the petition to remove police from the schools. And we built a campaign along with that petition. We kicked the police out of their own damn precinct, and then incredible organizers launched the Chaz or the CHOP, the Capitol Hill Occupied protest, for a time, until our liberal mayor did exactly what Trump wanted her to do, which was to use the police to push out the protesters from around the CHOP. You know, you can see that liberal politicians fall right in line with far-right extremist white nationalists like Trump when it comes to questions of the police. But we also we kicked the police out of the King County Labor Council, and this to me was especially gratifying because I had endured a lot of ridicule and mockery for suggesting that the police were not part of the working class, that they had no business being in our movement, that you can imagine every single moment in the history of the labor movement, in the history of struggles for social justice, and just ask yourself, which side were the police on? Every single time. It doesn't matter if you were envisioning the fights for the 8-hour workday and the Haymarket martyrs. It doesn't matter if you were envisioning the Stonewall Rebellion and the uprising for LGBTQ plus liberation, or if you're thinking of Rosa Parks. Whatever your favorite moment in making the world a better place is, you can find the police on the other side. And for raising that, for a long time, I was marginalized, and now the entire King County Labor Council has said you have no business being with the labor movement. So that was an incredible victory for us. And there's just so many other victories around the country, right? They kicked the police out of the Oakland public schools, right? They kicked the police out of the Denver public schools, and on, right? Places are getting funding cut for the police. And I just want to say uprisings really get the goods, y'all. It's the way to go. And I'm not the only one that's drawing that conclusion right now. And so what's producing these uprisings? I think unquestionably, it's the ongoing relentless murder of Black people, right? Of BIPOC people. It's the murder of Breonna Taylor. It's the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. It's the murder of Tony McDade. And definitely it's the murder of George Floyd that just had my stomach turning, like so many of you. But I think it's also the overlapping social, economic, political, health crises that are producing this explosive struggle that we're in right now. And it really just struck me that George Floyd was arrested for the alleged crime of passing a counterfeit bill. And I was really thinking about what that meant. What kind of crime is that, right? I want us to think about how that can be considered a crime when this entire country has always traded in counterfeit currency. We have a counterfeit democracy here, right? We have a counterfeit equality. We have counterfeit liberty, right? Today, some are celebrating a counterfeit Independence Day, right? That wasn't an Independence Day at all for Black people, for Native American people, right? And so we reject that whole framework that led to the vicious murder of George Floyd. And I think as people defended themselves from the police and burned down the police station and took stuff from stores in Minneapolis in the wake of George Floyd's murder, activist and former Women's March co-chair Tamika Mallory, I think, made a really powerful observation in her address to the protesters that we should all consider today. She said, "Don't talk to us about looting. You are the real looters. America has looted Black people. America has looted the Native Americans when they first came here. So looting is what you do. We learned it from you. We learned violence from you. We learned violence from you. The violence was what we learned from you. So if you want us to do better, then damn it, you do better." Right? And I want us to consider that it isn't only those historical crimes where we learned about looting, right? I think it's also, we can take a look at the troubled asset relief program of 2008. What else can you call that but looting? When they took $700 billion in taxpayer money to purchase toxic assets from investment banks. What else but looting can you call the $2.2 trillion Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, the CARES Act, that shoveled money to wealthy corporations while unemployment levels have hit record rates not seen since the Great Depression, right? I mean, let's talk about looting. Over almost 20 years of war in Afghanistan, they have looted some $2 trillion of money that should have been spent on our healthcare to help deal with this crisis that we're in. We can talk about the $182 billion that's spent every year on furthering mass incarceration in the prison industrial complex, right? And in my own city, they just built a $200 million youth jail just a few blocks from the school where I teach. And you can see when they're getting ready to lay off teachers across Seattle and across the state and across the country, you can see them building that school to prison pipeline machinery ready to funnel our kids right into that facility, right? And I think we should just be clear that the police are not here to fight crime. If that was the case, they would be up in some boardrooms arresting hedge fund managers and investment bankers and war profiteers and the prison industrial complex organizers and these politicians that keep giving them money, right? So let's talk about looting. And I think we should also consider just the everyday commonplace example of looting, which is just the looting of paying workers less than the value of their labor. But of course, we don't call that looting here in America. We call that profit, right? And I think that we need to start redefining these terms. And we need to take on this system. And I say this because I want us to really wrestle with the enormity of the problem. In recent days, many people have learned about the horrors of police violence in a way that they really had no clue before. But we also want to end the system that needs police violence to protect it, right? We have to end the violence of structural racism, right? Not just the violence of the police, but the violence of structural racism, the violence of capitalism, the violence of homophobia, of transphobia, of xenophobia, and all forms of oppression. What we need is a complete overhaul of the social, political, and economic relationships in society. And so the question that we really have to grapple with is, how do we go from a rebellion in the streets against one of the most brutal manifestations of capitalism, which is the police, into a mass movement that develops an intersectional and revolutionary and socialist consciousness that sets about seizing power from those who don't deserve it? I'm talking about people like Jeff Bezos, who is scheduled to become the world's first trillionaire. I think they said by the year 2026, he might reach that plateau. I suggest we get busy and have a revolution before any such thing like a trillionaire comes into existence. That just blows my mind. But if we're going to defeat this system, I think we also have to defeat another form of violence. We also want to end what Henry Giroux has called the violence of organized forgetting. And I think that's the importances of conferences like this, to discuss the ideas that they don't want us to consider, the ideas that are not often taught in schools, the ideas that will help us get free. We need to analyze the Reconstruction movement and look at what it looked like in the wake of the Civil War to have a movement to organize institutional anti-racism before it was shut down, right? We should look at the campaigns from Ida B. Wells against lynching in this country. You know, I had a student that I taught in middle school who was walking down the street here in Seattle, just about 10 minutes from my home, and a pickup truck pulled up next to him, yelled the N-word at him, and then they took out guns and just started firing at him. And thank God they missed. And he took off running and he was unharmed. But the trauma that Black people are going through, whether it's the images of death that are constantly being cycled, or it's their own physical safety that's at risk just living in this country, is unreal. And that's why we have to analyze the movements that have taken on the roots of inequality and racism. We need to understand how the 8-hour day was fought for and won, because the corporations never intended for us to have a weekend, to have any free time. And it was only because people organized and fought together collectively that we won that. We need to analyze the general strikes of the 1930s and talk about how we build a labor movement that's capable of shutting down entire cities, like happened in Minneapolis and Toledo and San Francisco. And we need to learn the lessons of the Black Panther Party that linked the struggles against racism to the struggles against capitalism. And I think that we really have to learn those lessons, but we also have to go further than any of those movements did. Because if we have another round of epic struggle like Reconstruction, or like the mass general strikes of the 30s, or the civil rights and Black power movements, any of those, if we have another round of amazing struggle, but we don't remove those from power who have been misusing it, who have been hoarding the wealth, they will simply reimpose oppression once again, once the movements have subsided. And that's how, you know, we went from the enslavement of Africans to Jim Crow to this era of mass incarceration. We destroyed one manifestation of racism, of inequality, but we have failed to abolish the entire underlying system that needs racism and needs oppression and needs class exploitation to continue. So taking a look at the economic landscape, I think, in the United States gives me hope that this rebellion can really deepen, and that increasing numbers of people are beginning to draw revolutionary conclusions from their participation in this rebellion. Because I want us to remember that for much of the rebellions of the 60s and 70s, the economy was actually expanding. And I think, you know, of course, many people were left out of the prosperity of that economic expansion, but it can be a real challenge to truly build a revolutionary period when the economy is relatively stable. This rebellion today, I think, comes in the context that is very different. It comes in the context of the Great Recession of 2008 and the current mass economic crisis as well, that I think have laid bare the fundamental instability of capitalism, and this system is just exposed for its inability to provide for the most basic needs of people. So here in the world's richest country, we have millions of people uninsured without healthcare in the middle of a health crisis and an international pandemic. We have over 500,000 people who are homeless. We have 20 million people or more unemployed. We have 45 million Americans who owe some 1.6 trillion in student loan debt. And of course, we know Black students who started schools in 2003, 1 out of 2 of them have already defaulted on their student loans. 46% of community college students were considered to be housing insecure in this country. We have 14.3 million Americans who are food insecure in the world's richest country. So it was certainly the horrific video of George Floyd that brought people out into the streets to protest for Black lives, but so many other grievances with this unjust society, I think, provide the basis for us to unite in a multiracial uprising to restructure society. And I just want to end by saying that it appears that the long, far too long, one-sided class war of this neoliberal era that we've lived through is coming to an end, and a new era of unrest and of uprising is coming to reclaim the wealth that we produced in the first place. And I think, there have been many beginnings of this movement. Occupy, I think, is an important touchstone to understand because it reframed consciousness in America to have people understand the depths of inequality. And the slogan, the 99% versus the 1%, was critical. But I think one of the problems with that movement was there were certainly places where activists in that struggle took up institutional racism, but because it wasn't a laser focus of the movement, it created a problem in that if we are going to be the 99%, we have to be united, and we can never be united if we're divided by racism and other forms of oppression. But today's rebellion is leading with the fight against racism. And I think that is critical to achieving the kind of unity that will be needed to build the mass movement to truly make the 99% powerful enough to take over society. And so, yes, we want reparations. We want to abolish the police and prisons. We also want to abolish the conditions that produce violence and poverty and racism. We want to abolish the capitalist system altogether. And the billionaire class had better watch their back because we are coming for them. And there are a whole lot of us. Thank you.
All right. You all got me fired up. I am so grateful to share this space with my comrades, Amelia and Jesse. Thank you so much to the Socialism Conference, to Haymarket Books, to Jacobin, to the DSA for providing this space for us. Thank you, Amelia and Jesse, for what and who you brought into this space. Thank you for bringing George Floyd into this space. Thank you for bringing Breonna Taylor into this space. Tony McDade. I know that Elijah McClain is on our minds. Let's bring him into this space. Thank you for bringing all the victories into this space as well. Before I go on, I need to begin by saying that I'm speaking to you from Massachusetts and Wampanoag land, where communities who predate the United States continue to live today and continue to resist. Today is as great a day as any to shout out my Wampanoag relatives and celebrate the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe's recent victory in the courts against the latest efforts to steal their land. Please follow what is happening with the Mashpee Wampanoag, and let's build solidarity. I want to shout out my relatives who stood up yesterday in Oceti-Sakowin territory of the Sacred Black Hills in what colonizers called Mount Rushmore. I want to shout out those comrades who formed blockades when the president was trying to give his speech and made sure that that speech did not go uninterrupted and unopposed. Let us understand that the president's choice to hold a celebration there in that place last night, let us understand that that clarifies that this day, the 4th of July, is not about freedom. It never was. It is about colonization. Please follow the Indian Collective, the Red Nation, and other organizations connected with and building with relatives who were arrested last night. And just shout out in solidarity with all Indigenous peoples of this place and the ongoing struggles for self-determination in the face of colonization. And related to that, I just want to shout out to my comrades in Palestine resisting what Israel calls annexation at this moment, and what we know is ongoing colonization, enthusiastically supported by the United States. Solidarity with the Palestinian freedom struggle, which will win. Palestine will be free. How exciting is it to spend this day, this 4th of July, talking about revolution, talking about actual revolution that can actually achieve liberation for people in this place and in this world. I feel like I have the easy job now, since my comrades Amelia and Jesse already said so much about what is happening today, about the revolts and about revolution, made the case for revolution. So I just want to offer some observations about the struggle that exists now, and say a little more about what I think need to be important features of the coming revolution. Before I get to that, though, I just want to remind us to just a slightly darker time. Just 2 months ago, the dominant conversation in this country among progressives and on the left was about whether or not we need to support Joe Biden's presidential campaign. That was the thing that was dominating conversation in left and progressive circles. My, how things have changed. 2 months ago, in the op-ed pages of the New York Times, were condescending pieces about how we need to support Biden. Now there are pieces in those same op-ed pages of the New York Times about abolishing the police, about disbanding police departments. Now, I bring this up for 2 reasons. The first is to highlight the constant pull in the US, probably everywhere, but especially in this country, a constant pull toward narrowing our political horizons, a pull that radicals and revolutionaries must always resist. And second, I want to highlight, as my comrades Amelia and Jesse did before me, the factor that changed things. What is the thing that completely upended the political situation and conversation in the US? That is, of course, Black and Black-led rebellion. Black revolt began in this place before the United States was declared. It began when slavery began. It has been central to every wave of progressive change in this country, and it will be central in the coming revolution. What is happening now, I believe the kinds of things that Jesse and Amelia described in the cities that they live in, those things are reassurance that revolution is possible, yes, in this place called the United States. There are those who believe that things like universal health care or that free public education, higher education, these things that movements in other countries have already achieved, there are those who believe that that is actually too much for the United States, that could never happen here. And there are those who believe that that is as good as it possibly could get in this place. Now, I don't want to downplay for a moment what it would mean, what it will mean when we do achieve those things, which I believe is closer than we might think, because that will be transformative for the lives of so many of us. It will make this a more livable place. But I believe that what is unfolding right now is showing us that it is possible to go deeper. Look at the statues coming down. That is showing us that there are people in this country who are not only interested in making for a more equal or a less unequal present, but rather there are people engaging with, grappling with the history of this place, a history of violence and white supremacy and colonization, and saying, we don't want this anymore. We want to transform this. We want to uproot this. That conversation is not only possible, it is happening. So we need to broaden our horizons, I believe. I think we need to expand them and raise our expectations about what is possible. Now, with that said, I want to say more about the present and what is unfolding. And again, Amelia and Jesse already said so much. But I just want to appreciate what people are experiencing right now. The power of the present, the fact that people in mass meetings in Minneapolis, in Seattle, and elsewhere are discussing what life without police could look like. Like not only fighting back, but having conversations, collectively imagining, collectively engaging with radical ideas of abolition and disbanding police departments. The fact that people are discovering and rediscovering ways of caring for each other that Amelia and Jesse talked about. And the fact that people are learning so much about the history and the current reality of racism in this country, the power of the Black freedom struggle, and about our collective power. Now, I want to say a bit more about where we need to go further, even in this moment. And in particular, there's both a necessity and I think a real possibility of going much further to center, not only the horrendous violence in the reality of life for Black people in general, but to center the reality of Black women and Black trans folks, the violence against them and their leadership. Again, thank you to my comrades before me for saying the names of Breonna Taylor, of Tony McDade. We need justice for them. We need justice for Sandra Bland, for Rekia Boyd, and so many others. And I want to say Black liberation is not complete without women's liberation or trans liberation. And express gratitude to the people who remind us of those things. I want to shout out in particular somebody who is on Twitter and elsewhere all the time reminding us, No Name, Chicago's own MC, calling attention to the importance of centering what is happening with Black women and Black trans folks. And again, their leadership, because again, when we talk about the abolitionist conversations that we are having right now, who's leading it? People like Ruthie Wilson Gilmore, people like Angela Davis and Miriam Kaba and Kianga Yamada Taylor, and many, many more. Okay, a couple more things about the future and about the kind of revolutionary struggle that I believe we need to have, things that I believe need to be part of a revolutionary struggle in this present and in the future. And so first, when we talk about revolution, it must be a conversation about decolonization and ending US empire. Again, revolution does not just mean a change that leads to a more equal United States. I believe it must be a change that leads to the end of the United States as a project. I believe that it must involve the return of the land to the people whose land this has been, who have stewarded it and who have been dispossessed of their land, indigenous peoples. It must require reparations. It must require the liberation of territories like Puerto Rico and Guam and the US Virgin Islands and all the places colonized by US military bases and occupations. If we are not talking about closing every single one of those bases, then we are not really talking about what revolution would mean. And I believe that that conversation is possible and necessary. Related, I believe that this conversation and this struggle must be transnational for so many reasons, but principally because capitalism and US capitalism, US empire, they extend across borders, and therefore our struggle must extend across borders and must be against borders. Moreover, when we talk about actually achieving liberation, the many problems that we encounter when we struggle in this place called the United States, we will not find all of the solutions to those problems solely within these borders. We must our scope, our vision has to extend beyond them. We must learn the lessons. I mean, the people all around the world for so long have fought for justice. And so we have so much to learn that struggle must be transnational. So I want to wrap up. I am really psyched to talk more with my comrades in a conversation. And I just want to say that we have to prepare for revolution, not as like this abstract idea, but something that is real and achievable in our lifetimes. In the words of Angela Davis, you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. I think that we have to prepare ourselves for revolutionary struggle. And what exactly that looks like every day is a question, of course, that has many answers. It's about getting organized. It's about writing. It's about reading. It's about connecting and building relationships of solidarity and comradeship, and so many more things. But I want to say this. I want to say that socialism is possible. I believe that it must center Black liberation. It must be feminist. It must end borders, and it must reorder this society in so many ways. So many ways. A word about this particular moment that we are in, because as Amelia said, protests continue. In many ways, they are expanding. And in many ways, they don't look exactly the way they did a few weeks ago. We don't know the precise trajectory of this chapter of struggle. But I will say this. In 2014, when Ferguson rose up, that was this incredible rebellion against the murder of Michael Brown. And yes, there were solidarity protests around the country in solidarity with the Ferguson uprising. But it was actually months later, when the cop who killed Michael Brown was not indicted, that is when protest exploded. In other words, the Ferguson uprising was just the beginning of that chapter, the beginning of that wave. And so as tectonic as what we have experienced in the past several weeks has been, I believe this is just the beginning, actually. I believe that there is more to come. So I'll conclude by saying two things. One, just to affirm what Jesse just said in his remarks, that we need to learn from these previous moments of struggle in our radical history, but go further than any of them. I believe it is possible to go further than them when we do learn from them and learn from living veterans of those movements, many of whom are with us today and in the streets today. And to end finally, looking at history, not only the history of this place, but around the world, like every couple generations, we have a shot at radically transforming the world. You think about the 1960s and what that meant all around the world. I believe that our time is unfolding. This is just the beginning. So let's learn and prepare and fight. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, man. Thank you. We appreciate those words, Corey. I'm 100% with you in this struggle. It's an honor to be in the struggle with you both. And I want to just open up the conversation now for us to talk about how we begin to deepen this movement and get closer to that revolutionary future I think we all want. There's so many places we could take the discussion, but I thought maybe we could just start with talking more about the political character of the uprising that's happening right now, the demands and the ideas that young people are going into the streets with right now. And one thing I wanted to suggest to open this dialogue up is something that Barbara Ransby wrote in her book, Making All Black Lives Matter. And one of the things that she points out is that this round of struggle, Black Lives Matter, has an important political character to it in that much of the leading force of this movement is organized by Black women and specifically with a Black feminist point of view and set of politics. You can look at the three founders of Black Lives Matter, right? And you can look at the stressing of intersectionality and understanding the overlapping forms of oppression. And to me, that gives me great hope in a way that we are more politically armed to take on the many forms of oppression that will have to be part of the struggle in order to move forward. And I'm curious what you all think about how this rebellion compares to the past ones politically, and what are the strengths and are there weaknesses of the political character right now?
I would love to talk about where I see intersectionality in YDSA and just the amazingness that I think is happening when these college students, high school students, community college students are calling to defund the police. Unfortunately, defunding the police was not a goal that many YDSA organizers held before this. And I think it's part of the need for intersectionality and the need for sort of imagining a better world. I think a lot of times, young organizers especially are just sort of forming these organizations on their campuses for demands that address the members' material needs, whether it be, expanded mental health services, cheaper housing, no tuition hikes, things like that. And those are great and good experiences to fight for. But where intersectionality comes in is seeing what the most vulnerable students on campus are facing and being engaged in a struggle and forming coalition with people of color-led organizations, forming coalitions with, your Black Student Union or your Students for Justice in Palestine on your campus. And I think that's something we're seeing more and more in YDSA as YDSA grows and diversifies. And I hope that this lesson can be carried over beyond just this summer and this political moment, but into all of our youth organizing in the future.
Right on.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think that this time we're in is transformative. Like you said, there are people who maybe didn't think about defunding police before this, but they do now. That it's okay, to be where we're at when we're there, if we're open and willing to revisit our ideas, right, and to learn. And so many people are learning from this time. So I actually think that that's really beautiful. The kind of just evolution that so many people are experiencing simultaneously. And I do think that one of the things that is so special about this time is that it is a time of revelation. In so many ways, this whole few years with Trump in power has been a time of revelation. For people who didn't see certain things, it's revealed now in a new way. But Black revolt always is revelatory, and I think that a lot is being revealed, and we're seeing, what intersectionality. I think one of the things it does is that framework it captures the fullness of our experience. It allows for the fullness of the political dimensions that we need to explore, and therefore it allows us to grapple with just how deep our liberation struggles must be. And so I want to return to, I'm really appreciating that question that you raised, Jesse, and I want to return to the kind of the conversation happening right now about Black women and queer folks in particular, and as you said, Black Lives Matter from the start was calling attention to what is happening to Black people, to Black America, to Black people beyond borders, and has always been led by women, has been led by feminists who have also called attention to people to women and queer folks who tend to be marginalized within marginalization, right? When we talk about Black lives, as critical as it is for us to fight for the George Floyds and the Michael Browns, and the Eric Garners. Of course, we need justice for all of our brothers murdered. And also, we know that Black women and queer folks tend to be forgotten or even obscured, you know? And it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that one thing that is special about the time we're in right now is I think we actually have an opportunity to overcome that problem, to make it so that whenever we fight for us, we fight for all of us.
Yeah.
You know, I think that that's part of the promise of what it means to have Black feminism play such a key role in all this.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, man. You know, people need to hear the name of Charlena Lyles, who was a pregnant mother here in Seattle 3 years ago, who was just in her own apartment, and she felt someone had broken into her apartment, and she called the police, and they came and gunned her down in front of her own kids, right? And yes, we need to fight for all of our brothers, and we also need to know that her name is often obscured and not seen. And as you said, like the marginalization within our movement, we have a great opportunity to overcome that with this intersectional lens and understand the way racism and sexism overlap to push the most vulnerable to the margins, right? And that's an incredible moment I think we're in, where people are wanting to fight for the most oppressed and completely uproot the conditions of that oppression. And I'm also struck by something that Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor has pointed out, in that there are a lot of white people in the streets for Black lives right now. And it's an incredible moment where we can help educate a large number of white folks about the depths of this problem, and also that they are motivated into the streets because there's so many aspects of the system that are failing working class and poor white people as well, and that there's a real basis for solidarity in a country that has so many homeless white folks as well, right? And so finding ways to build that kind of solidarity, I think, is really important. I wanted us to also talk about the international dimension of this struggle that we're in. I mean, it was breathtaking to see the statues of slave owners toppled in London, right? And to see this go international in a way that I wasn't expecting, and that reminded me more of the struggles of the 60s and 70s, right? But Corey, you talked a lot about we need to end colonization and fight for indigenous rights. And I know, you know, you've fought around issues for Palestine, and as well, you know, we talked about the need for supporting students for justice in Palestine. So maybe we can talk about the international character of the rebellion, why the politics of internationalism are so important to move from rebellion to revolution.
Yeah, I would love to say a word about that. I mean, the thing about those statues coming down in Europe and the people we've seen on the streets in Europe, in Australia, you know, it really does show that it shows a number of things, including the fact that this system is transnational. I mean, it's you know, like one of the bizarre mythologies of, you know, that's especially invoked on a day like this is like, you know, there's something about America that is so special that, like, you know, in the United States is like this self-contained container. What has emerged here and what has been produced here is solely of, you know, this place. And the fact that we saw, you know, the statues of slave traders come down and you know, in Bristol and being, you know, surrounded elsewhere in Europe, it shows that slavery was transnational. Slavery was global, right? And that's how capitalism emerged. And those organic linkages, therefore, remain. It didn't just end when slavery ended. But it also shows something about resistance. And I do think about Black rebellion in particular. Like there's something so compelling about it and so resonant about it, right? That people in France could say, yes, we are marching for George Floyd, but we're also marching for our people here in this place who've been brutalized by the police. Or in Australia can say, yeah, of course we're moved by the murder of George Floyd, and also we need to talk about the murders and the brutalization of Indigenous peoples in this place. So there's something really resonant about it too. And I'll end my comments. I would love to know what Amelia has to say too. By saying this, that there are times when your scope is so big, sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming. And I know that I've been in a lot of conversations with comrades, who are part of the fight for the Black freedom struggle here, and also part of the Palestinian freedom struggle, thinking about what it means that there's a revolt unfolding across this place called the United States at the same time as Israel is doing what it calls annexation, and just thinking man, how do we hold both these realities? How do we have the space? And I think that we need a politics that can make the space, and I think that when we do that right, one doesn't take away from the other, they feed off of each other, and that's what's so beautiful about a transnational vision, is that we learn, I've learned so much from the struggle in Palestine, and I talk to Palestinian comrades who say they've learned so much from the Black freedom struggle here.
No doubt.
It's beautiful. I think that there's a couple of things tying all of us together internationally right now. I think one of them for sure is the pandemic that we're experiencing, and how in the system of global capitalism, the people who are suffering, the poor, the working class, the marginalized, they're going to be the first to die. And, they're really asked to go back to work, to continue working their service jobs where they're getting underpaid, all in the service of capitalism. And their labor really just goes up and up and up the chain into the pockets of these billionaires and these multinational corporations. And that's something that unites everybody around the whole world. Obviously, just capitalism unites us in general all the time, but right now in the pandemic, it's especially cruel. So I think that's something very important, and something that has given these protests sort of an extra bit of momentum. Also, I think that just the development of police under capitalism is sort of a worldwide phenomenon. For example, the American police departments, many of them get training from Israel. And the sort of militarization of the police and the forming of military alliances, many of which were made against communism, against people of color, in order to keep the third world suppressed and to extract resources from them. Those military alliances play out in the same dynamics that exist between police departments and policing in different countries across the world, where police really have transformed or are an occupying force in whatever community that they are assigned to police, and not, organic members of the community deciding things collectively among themselves. So I think that that's very important. The connection that policing has to capitalism and the pandemic are both big factors here.
No doubt. Thank you both for sharing those connections that we have with people all over the world. And I hope that people will find ways to engage specifically in the struggle for Palestine right now. There was a young man who was chanting Palestinian Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter who was shot down by the IDF recently. And I think, Corey, you're absolutely right that the Black struggle has inspired people all over the world. And as well, the Palestinians' struggle for their liberation has been a touchstone in the international movement. And it's a barometer of how free we are in the world. And it's time that we rise up internationally to defend people who are having their ethnic cleansing occur right now. And so I was really excited to join a protest this week here in Seattle that went down to the police precinct and had a rally for Palestinian lives that made just that connection, Amelia, that you made, that said our police here in Seattle are trained by the IDF in Israel, right? And they learn those tactics of brutality from the IDF. And that's why when the protests in the streets after Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson were so inspiring, when Palestinians were telling protesters in the streets of Ferguson how to deal with the tear gas that they were encountering that was created by Israeli companies. And we're really going to have to take up this struggle across borders if we're going to win. So we're coming close to the end of time. I thought maybe if you have any last comments, please throw them out. I mean, I'm thinking like if people want to discuss the next steps in this struggle, we know we want a fundamental transformation and we want a revolution. What are the next steps that we take to embolden this movement, to give us wins and confidence that we can go farther, right? One of the things that I think can be done is kicking the police out of the school near you immediately, right? And that kind of victory can lead people to think, well, what else can we do, right? And if we can organize and live in school every day without police, maybe we can make that a slippery slope to living in the rest of society without police. And so that's one focus I think that could be great for the movement to take up on this broader trajectory. But we just have a couple minutes, but I'd love to hear what you think is next for the struggle.
Yeah, I would say just please join YDSA. If you just Google YDSA, you can find our website, and there's lots of resources there. If you're a student, you can join and start organizing on your campus, organizing to kick the police out of your campus. Or if you have any connections to any schools, try and get a group of like-minded people involved. Yeah.
Right on.
Yes. Shout out to getting organized. Let's do it. Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I mean, you know, like what both of you are saying is so right, because the thing is, like, this society is so policed and it's so racist that it means that the fight really is everywhere. We have to get the police out of everywhere, and we have to fight racism, institutional racism, in all the institutions of this society. So yeah, there's a lot of fights ahead of us, and I just, I so appreciate just the fact that we've had a dynamic where it feels like each city, like cities across the country, have been raising the bar. You know what I mean? So in Minneapolis, they're like, we're going to disband our police department. And we're like, wow, okay, can we do that? In Seattle, they're like, we're going to seize part of the city and make it free of police. Let's see what that's like. And we're like, maybe that's possible. In LA, we were able to win the city, the mayor pledging to cut the police budget by 5%. So then in Boston, people were like, let's do it by 10%, and we got it. We got, we had the vote, and it was cut by 2.5%, which was not enough. We want to go further, but also, a year ago, the idea of cutting the police budget at all, let alone by 2.5%, would have been unthinkable. So I just really appreciate the fact that the bar is being raised, across the country. That's a really positive dynamic. Second thing I'll just say is, I think we have so much to learn. Like, this is a time for learning. And even if the protests in the streets, when they're not happening every day, that's okay, because we have so much to learn and just reflect on. Like, the reflection happening right now is just hugely significant. So shout out to Haymarket and other things that we have to help deepen and make our understandings richer, because we need that richness. And I guess the last thing I'll say is, yeah, like, we should think about how can we always go further. That's, when I was one of the my elder comrades who, like, recruited me into the socialist movement, one of the things that he said to me was, socialists don't just show up, to the struggle. We always think about how can it go further? Like, how can we take it further? That's part of what it means to be a socialist. So I hold on to that, and I think about, for us, thinking together, learning together, imagining together, appreciating the richness that does exist, thinking about what we have to learn in this moment and from history, and also thinking about how we can go further, and actually drawing from history and from the richness of this moment to push ourselves further.
No doubt, no doubt. Thank you all. I just want to say I'm really excited for the Black Lives Matter at School movement this year, because I think that there is going to be a new energy. We have begun discussing moving from just our week of action, where we make our demands and teach our lessons, to also adding a year of purpose and having ongoing fight to uproot institutional racism in the schools throughout the year. And also, I think one of the next steps that we need to take forcefully is rooting this movement in the labor movement. It was amazing to see all the docks shut down coast to coast across the West Coast by the ILWU on Juneteenth. And I think that we need to integrate the fight against racism with the working class struggle at the workplace and in our unions. And I think there's immense power there that we're beginning to see the potential of. And I can't wait to see the struggles to come, and to be with you both and everybody who's at this forum together with in the struggles to come. So thanks to the Socialism Committee for having us, and I'll turn it over to Dana for some last remarks.
Yeah, thank you so much to our panelists, Amelia, Jesse, Curry. That was not only pure fire, but I think it gave hope for those of us who are in the struggle for revolution, for fundamental change of society. And that was just very, very good for the soul, especially today of all days. And I want to thank everybody who is joining us from all over the country, all over the world in this space. We do hope to be able to gather together in person again next year on the 4th of July here in Chicago for the Socialism Conference. But I know from the Socialism Committee, we are so grateful that people took time to be part of the virtual conference today. Just a quick reminder, all the recordings from today can be found at the Socialism Conference website, socialismconference.org. And we are working on rescheduling the panel that didn't live stream, so we will send an email with updates on that. And thank you for your patience. And in closing, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and another world is possible if we fight for it. Goodbye, everyone.